The story of Dying Light begins in the city of Harran, Turkey, during the lead-up to the 2014 Global Athletic Games, a young adult athletic competition run by an organization called PIAT, or Peace in Our Time. Unlike similar organizations, the games were primarily a ceremonial affair, used to promote world peace using lighthearted competition. Hoping to capitalize on this event, Harran's president Hamid put everything they had into promoting the games, believing it would stimulate their economy and bring attention to their recently constructed flagship stadium. Just weeks before the games began, a virus, later known as the Harran virus, infected a man by the name of OverusedBruh. While it is not known where exactly the virus originated, all evidence suggests Baruch, a seemingly ordinary resident of Harran's Old Town, somehow became patient zero for the virus, which resulted in him assaulting his co-workers and eventually led to his death at the hands of law enforcement. Despite this, the infection did not die with him, as it would quickly go on to infect a man from the slums of Harran, who then bit a boy by the name of Joran Baidar. Around the same time, Harran's Commissioner of Health, Dr. Kaleem Abbas, traveled to the free clinic in the slums to conduct his weekly Tuesday visit. Near the end of the day, Joran's mother brought him in due to his erratic behavior and high fever. Believing the cause to be a variation of rabies or some sort of gastrointestinal virus, Abbas prescribed Joran some medication and collected a sample of his blood to conduct further tests. 6 days later, Abbas attended a weekly games planning meeting, during which President Hamid stated the importance of the games to their city's future, and his intention to invite as many people as he could to the city to witness its divine beauty. While Abbas attempted to interject to raise concerns about a possible medical crisis, President Hamid dismissed his concerns, and ordered Abbas to, if anything, conduct his research in private. The following Tuesday, Abbas returned to the clinic in the slums, where he was overwhelmed by patients with symptoms similar to Joran. Not even hours later, Joran himself was brought in by his family, who noted that he had been in a never-ending fit of rage for the past few days. Not even minutes later, Joran, in an adrenaline-fueled fit of rage, broke free from his restraints and escaped into the slums of Harran, never to be seen again. About 1 week before the start of the games participants, including their parents and a large number of press, arrived in Harran. Among the participants were 2 young women named Mel Wyatt and Jade the Scorpion Aldemir, a kickboxing prodigy. Over the next 3 days, the city of Harran published a couple of blog posts attributing the growing rate of unusual and violent attacks to influenza, urging citizens to take precautionary measures to remain healthy. Over the following weekend, Harran reported that the city was nearing epidemic, yet rather than cancel the event, they instead decided to set up a number of quarantine zones to manage the infected. Days later, the games officially began with Tuesday's opening ceremony, and were supposed to conclude with Saturday's main event, a captivating parkour race. Before the race could conclude, however, an untold number of infected flooded into the stadium, killing thousands of athletes and spectators alike in an event that would later become known as Disaster Day, or D-Day. With no choice but to accept defeat, Harran's governor officially declared a state of epidemic. During this chaotic period, Dr. Abbas wrote a letter chronicling recent events, planning to send it and Joran's blood to an American colleague of his named Dr. Christina Marlowe. On his way to the post office the weekend after he finished it, however, Abbas somehow lost the letter. Intent on rewriting the letter later that day, Abbas sent the blood sample alone, and made a return trip to his office, a trip that Abbas would not survive. The blood samples, on the other hand, would eventually make it to their final destination, where they would then be sent to a world-renowned humanitarian organization known as the Global Relief Effort, or GRE, who saw promise in weaponizing the Harran virus. As such, they offered their services to the Ministry of Health, promising to identify the origin of the virus and contain the epidemic that it had caused. To maintain this facade, the GRE began developing an injectable medication known as anti-zombie injection, or Antizin, likely using Joran's blood sample. Presumably days after the GRE arrived in Harran, they immediately designated Harran's Old Town as Sector 0 for the virus, prompting the Ministry of Defense to put Old Town under strict quarantine, an operation that would be carried out by the GRE themselves. In accordance with the quarantine, Old Town was sealed off with concrete walls, and its citizens were put under complete lockdown. Later informed that the GRE would handle the relocation efforts in a safe and timely manner so as to not make matters worse. In addition to this, the GRE began setting up laboratories within the walls, where officially they planned to finish Antizin development. However, unofficially, the GRE actually intended to weaponize the virion strain of the virus. Sometime after Old Town was put under quarantine, the Ministry of Defense placed Harran under martial law. They then followed this act by effectively giving the GRE enforcement authority over the army, prompting the GRE to appoint Colonel Kadir Suleiman, the governor and commander-in-chief of the enforcement forces. Tasked with primarily protecting GRE resources, Suleiman became one of their most valuable assets. 2 weeks after D-Day, the GRE began airdropping supplies such as Antizin and disaster relief kits into Harran. Around that same time, Mel Wyatt stumbled upon Dr. Abbas's letter to Dr. Marlowe, learning about the initial stages of the infection. She would later go on to search for Antizin herself to cure her infection, before ultimately succumbing to the virus. Sometime later, the GRE failed to evacuate Kadir Suleiman's younger brother Hassan, resulting in his death. No longer tethered to humanity via his brother, Kadir donned the identity of Rise, a ruthless leader who quickly attracted Harran's marauder population. Under Rise's watch, the faction became a parasite of Harran, sucking it dry of resources to fuel Rise's growing ambition. Around this same period, a parkour instructor named Brecken formed the Runners, a faction focused on using parkour to avoid conflicts altogether, retrieving supplies, scavenging for resources, and rescuing survivors in the process. As their influence grew, the Runners eventually took command of a number of outposts in Harran. Most notably was a large apartment complex in the slums of Harran, which they simply dubbed the Tower. It was after that point Jade Aldemir and her younger brother Rahim joined the faction. Sometime later, the GRE sent an operative named Amir Qureshi to escort 2 scientists named Dr. Camden and Dr. Zara, who were working in tandem to develop a cure for the virus, out of Sector 0. During the trip, however, the group were ambushed by infected, forcing Camden to return to his lab in Sector 0, while Amir and Zara found refuge with the Runners in the slums. Meanwhile, in the countryside of Harran, a man simply known as the Colonel entrusted his 2 closest companions with what he no doubt viewed as possible solutions to the infection. The first was a nuclear warhead activation code, which he gave to a close friend of his named Attila, an ethnographer who came to the Harran countryside to study their ancient Children of the Sun religion. The second was a small map and key hidden within a pack of cigarettes, which he gave to his wife Jasmine shortly before his death at the hands of the infection. Jasmine was then dragged away by religious fanatics who believed her to be a shaman figure of the Children of the Sun, known as the Mother. When Jasmine eventually found the map and key her husband had hidden, it led her and a group of her followers to a hidden military facility, where half of her followers went to turn on the power, while Jasmine and the others uncovered vials containing a strange elixir. Close to turning, Jasmine drank the vial, trusting that her husband had led her to a possible cure. However, this did not have the effect she desired, as in its pure state, the liquid turned her into a sentient volatile. Shrouded in darkness, Jasmine unconsciously murdered her nearby followers, only realizing what she had done when the others turned the lights on. Vowing to become the mother they deserved, she used the remainder of the vials to create a gaseous version of the elixir, giving her followers the immunity effects and telepathic bond with her mind without turning them into volatiles, or at least not immediately. It was after that point the Children of the Sun rapidly grew in popularity within Haran's countryside, which the mother planned to use to eventually gain access to the nuclear codes and rid the world of the infection. Around spring of 2015, Rise, a full-fledged warlord at this point, stole a classified GRE document containing the GRE's plans to weaponize the Variant strain of the virus. Using the file as leverage against the GRE, Rise gave the file to a proxy of his, who was given strict orders to release the file to the public if the GRE ever targeted Rise. To prevent this from happening, the GRE blocked all intra and inter-Haran transmissions, as well as recruited a highly skilled and well-meaning mercenary named Kyle Crane to retrieve the file. Around late spring to early summer of 2015, Kyle Crane was briefed on his mission aboard a transport aircraft 5,000 feet above Haran, making Crane believe that the file Suleiman stole was a possible cure for the infection. After parachuting to the ground, Crane was ambushed by Rise's men, including his right-hand man Tahir. Defending himself with his firearm, Crane attracted a horde of infected, one of which bit him before he was narrowly saved by Jade and Amir. While Jade managed to save Crane from the attack, Amir unexpectedly died in the process, leaving Crane stranded in the quarantine zone. Nearly 3 days later, Brecken led a group of runners on an intercept mission to secure the antizen contained within GRE airdrops. Not long after, Crane awoke inside the tower, where he was sent to make contact with the leader of the runners. However, instead of finding Brecken, Crane was confronted by Rahim, who tasked him with rescuing a survivor on the 13th floor to earn his keep. On the 13th floor, he made contact with the GRE, stating that he was taking the steps necessary to find if this Brecken was in fact Suleiman. When Crane finished rescuing the survivor, he traveled to the roof, where Rahim taught him the basics of parkour. At the end of his lesson, Crane was struck by the first of many seizures as the result of his infection. To suppress the symptoms, Crane was sent to find Dr. Zara, who administered him with antizin and shared his belief that he and Dr. Camden were one breakthrough away from discovering a true cure for the virus. His symptoms postponed, Crane made contact with a man named Spike, who ordered Crane to arm the traps around the slums to aid in Brecken's mission. Despite this, Brecken's mission was cut short when he was struck in the head by one of Rise's men just as he approached an airdrop. When Crane returned to the tower the next morning, he identified Brecken as just another survivor, meaning that this Rise character he kept hearing about was likely the man the GRE were after. To make contact with him, the GRE had Crane follow Brecken's command to find airdrops around the slums. However, when Crane eventually found one, the GRE ordered him to destroy the precious antizin, hoping that in their desperation, the runners would send Crane to make a deal with Rise. Just as the GRE predicted, when Crane made it back to the tower, Brecken ordered him to make a deal with Rise for more antizin. Inside Rise's garrison, Crane identified Rise as the GRE's target, and followed through with a number of missions in service to Rise. During this period, a woman named Troy contacted Crane from Sector 0, thanking him for restoring intra-Haran communications, one of the many things he had done for Rise. Likewise, the restoration of the communications allowed Zara and Camden to continue their cure research, putting them closer than ever to finding a much-needed cure as the GRE had halted antizin drops. When Crane returned to the garrison, Rise handed him a fraction of the antizin he originally promised, stating that if he wanted any more, Crane would deliver Jade to him. Refusing to do so, Crane consulted the GRE about other methods of securing the file. The GRE, however, pushed him to follow through with the trade, Not quite desperate enough to do so, Crane followed Jade to a school which she had reason to believe Rise's men were using to store antizin. While in the end the two of them didn't find exactly what they were looking for, they did uncover a crate full of plastic explosives. By the time Crane returned to the tower, the plan, as per Raheem's insistence, became to use the explosives to destroy a volatile hive. While Raheem prepared for the mission, Zara had Crane secure a sample from a bolter, which he believed could further their efforts to develop a cure. The only problem was that Camden needed to get his hands on the tissue sample and research data himself all the way in Sector 0. Motivated by the prospect of a cure, Crane agreed to deliver the research himself when they eventually needed him to. Meanwhile, Raheem, alongside another runner named Omar, took it upon themselves to plant the explosives in the hive. Overwhelmed by the sheer number of infected, Omar was killed and Raheem was infected. After informing Crane of Omar's death, carefully excluding his own infection, Raheem fled to a train yard where he handed the explosives off to Crane, who then used them to destroy the hive. When Crane returned to Raheem to share the good news, however, he found that he had already turned, forcing Crane to put him out of his misery. While Crane made his way back to the tower, Zara handed his research off to Jade, who then took it to Sector 0. While Crane shared the news of Raheem's death with Brecken, Rise's men took Zara hostage and blew up his lab. Hoping to find him, Crane made his way to Rise's garrison. Inside, the Ministry of Defense informed him that Haran was scheduled to be carpet-bombed to stop the infection before it could spread beyond the city. To save the thousands of civilians that were still trapped inside the city, Crane bought himself 48 short hours to find Zara and help him somehow synthesize a cure. Wasting no time, Crane eventually found Zara, who shared Jade's whereabouts before the two of them were captured by Rise. Hours later, Crane awoke inside the pit, where he battled against hordes of infected. In doing so, Rise deduced that Crane had been recruited by the GRE, prompting him to order his proxy to publish the file. He then shared the GRE's true intentions to weaponize the virus before ordering his men to kill Crane. Acting fast, Crane killed the two gunmen, sliced off Rise's hand, and went to save Zara shortly before he bled out. Dozens of weapons trained on him, Crane made a run for the exit. When Crane reached safety, Brecken pointed him toward a group known as the Saviors, who could smuggle him to Sector 0. While this quickly turned out to be a trap set by the Saviors, Crane eventually made it to Sector 0, where he made contact with Jade using Troy's radio. Hoping to gain her ultimate trust, he revealed his alliance with the GRE, and the Ministry's plan to bomb the city if they couldn't synthesize a cure. Angered by Crane's betrayal, Jade continued her mission alone. While Crane went to dig up information about Jade, Troy had her communications expert break through the GRE's jamming, learning that the GRE were under fire for the file Rise released, and the outside world were fed the narrative that Haran was completely free of survivors. To prove otherwise, Crane helped a runner named Michael plant explosives in a tower in the pattern of a frowny face. Yet their efforts were quickly undermined when the Ministry sent a fighter jet to destroy the tower altogether. The cure left as their last hope, Jade, who at this point was infected, shared her location with Crane. However, when Crane arrived, he found Rise's men had taken her and the research to a nearby museum. At the museum, Rise purposefully allowed Crane to free Jade, only to present the both of them with a single shot of antizin, hoping that Crane would finally have the courage to make the decision of who to save himself. Before he could do so, Crane's seizures returned in full force, causing him to hallucinate that Jade had fully turned, when in reality, he was the one who was on the verge of losing his humanity. In this state, Jade injected Crane with antizin, saving his life and dooming herself to a fate worse than death. In her final moments, Jade killed the surrounding soldiers, forcing Crane to take her life just as he did Raheem's. Following Jade's death, Tahir was ordered to kill Crane. When he failed, Crane secured the tissue sample and was told that Rise took the data himself. With only hours until the Ministry bombed Haran, Crane and Troy planned to buy themselves a little more time by amplifying a signal to break through the GRE's jamming, and ultimately inform the world that there were still survivors within Haran. To do so, Crane traveled to the tallest radio tower in the city, where, just moments before the bombs fell, Crane informed the world of their status, forcing the Ministry to call off the bombing run. Directly afterward, the GRE contacted Crane in an attempt to manipulate him into finding the cure for their benefit. Seeing right through their intentions, Crane indeed planned to find the cure, but not give it to the GRE. Following through with his own plan, Crane delivered the samples to Camden in his underground clinic. Afterwards, Rise informed Crane that he planned to trade the cure data with the GRE in exchange for transport out of Haran, and that if Crane wanted to reach him before that happened, he could find him at the top of his tower. Returning to the slums, Crane climbed Rise's monument to chaos, eventually confronting him at the apex of the tower. Holding the data over the edge, Rise prompted Crane to finally make a decision. He then tossed the data to Crane, followed shortly by a knife that plunged into Crane's shoulder. The two of them then fought until Crane managed to lodge a blade into Rise's stomach. When Crane turned his back to see the GRE chopper that was supposed to extract Rise tackled Crane off the building, Crane only managing to narrowly grab hold of a suspended shipping container. As Rise crawled to Crane, he stated that he would spare Crane from having to decide the fate of Haran if he handed over the data. Seemingly going along with this plan, Crane tossed the data over to Rise, giving him a free hand to pull the knife from his shoulder and stab Rise in the neck. When the fight concluded, the GRE ordered Crane to hand over the data to them like Rise had promised. However, Crane stated that as long as a cure was being developed inside the city, the Ministry wouldn't risk pulling the same shit they tried before. When the GRE left empty-handed, Camden informed Crane that his tests with the samples were beyond phenomenal, and that with the data, a cure was within reach. In the aftermath of Rise's death, Rise's men began indiscriminately pillaging what little was left of Haran. Making matters worse, by this point, the infected within the city grew in aggression, forcing survivors into deeper isolation. All of this culminated on October 11th, 2015, the date Haran was officially designated an exclusion zone, meaning the city was far too gone to warrant continued support. Left to their own accord, Spike equipped the runners with additional gear to help the remaining survivors of Haran. Sometime later, a group of runners rescued a wounded man who rambled about a group in the countryside that were magically immune to the infection. Using a map in the man's possession, Crane was sent outside the walls to investigate. When Crane arrived in the countryside, he was put into contact with a man named Jasir, the leader of a number of farms in the countryside. When Jasir turned Crane away, a smuggler named Khan offered to share what he knew if Crane did him a few favors, beginning with sourcing a vehicle for his future endeavors. When Crane returned to Khan's trailer, however, he was met by Jasir's daughter, who suggested Crane begin to earn the locals' trust by restoring their running water, which had been polluted by local bandits. After doing as told, Jasir informed Crane that the immunity he sought was provided by the mother, who only contacted the locals using intermediaries known as the Faceless. Jasir suggested that if Crane wished to speak to these Faceless, he would have to prove his worth by assisting their community. When Crane eventually gained enough trust with the children, the Faceless invited him to attend a ritual where he was given immunity to the virus via the elixir in exchange for his continued faith and support. Meanwhile in Haran, the runners successfully managed to fend off Rise's men, the undead, as well as rescue countless survivors. It was at that point, Spike took a group of survivors through the sewers and into the countryside, where they then escaped into the unknown. Sometime later, Crane earned enough trust with the children that they informed him that their mysterious immunity came from an elixir which far exceeded the effects of antizin. Willing to do practically anything to get his hands on it, Crane helped the children track down a shipment of the elixir, which they eventually discovered had been stolen by Rise's men shortly beforehand. While the children attempted to track down the shipment, Crane was sent to make contact with Attila, who sent Crane to retrieve an ancient ritual mask from the top of a mountain. Believing this mask would allow him to fulfill an ancient resurrection prophecy, Attila wrote a final note to Crane in which he shared the nuclear codes with him before committing suicide. Not long after this, a faceless man by the name of Brother Orkin was kidnapped and tortured by Rise's men. When Crane found his mortally wounded body, Orkin revealed that the men took the vials to a lighthouse. At the lighthouse, Crane discovered that Khan was responsible for stealing the vials, and that his men were headed for the dam. One of his men then fired a rocket at the lighthouse, killing Khan and allowing Crane to secure the vials before he left for the dam. When Crane arrived at the dam, the mother guided him to the secret military facility where she had been reborn months prior. There, she shared her story and revealed her true form before offering Crane a choice: sacrifice his own life to cleanse the world, or take the vials and save what was left of Haran. Keeping his promise to save Haran, Crane refused to go along with her plan. Faced with Crane's defiance, the mother forced him to drink the vial, and the two of them battled to the death. When Crane eventually defeated her, he took what was left of the vials and made his way to the surface, all the while unknowingly transforming into a sentient volatile. Over the next few years, the GRE hunted Crane throughout the countryside of Haran. In charge of the capture was a GRE scientist named Dr. Frank Bennett, who was led to believe that the GRE intended to use Crane to better understand the virus and ultimately restore Crane's humanity. All of this changed, however, when Bennett captured Crane around the mid-2020s, where he was then transferred to a man named Marius Fisher, better known as the Baron. Under the Baron's watch, Crane was shipped to the Baron's primary research facility in a small European town called Castor Woods. It was there Bennett did all he could to restore Crane's humanity. However, by the time he managed to accomplish this goal, the Baron had decided that the true breakthrough would not come by restoring Crane, but by making more like him. To do just that, the Baron began torturing Crane to see what exactly made him tick. Finding this to be extremely unethical, Bennett attempted to resign. However, the Baron instead decided to take him and his daughter Olivia prisoner. Soon enough, the Baron would discover that Crane's survival instincts were the primary trigger for his enhanced abilities. As such, the Baron tortured Crane endlessly over the next 13 years. In the handful of years following the initial outbreak, the GRE continued to study the Haran virus in a number of labs around the globe, the most notable of which was an unnamed lab located near Geneva, Switzerland. It was there the GRE developed a new, far more transmissible variant of the virus known as the tachy-transmissive Haran virus, or THV. All seemed to be going well until October of 2021, when THV escaped containment from the Geneva facility. Not long after, THV would go on to infect Zurich, Switzerland and Paris, France, kickstarting a long and deadly series of events that would become known as the Fall. When the newly appointed chief doctor of the GRE, Dr. Kobayashi Katsumi, was briefed on the outbreak on October 20th, she immediately put in place strict guidelines to slow the spread of the infection. About 2 months later, THV had spread to countless other major cities around Europe, prompting Katsumi to tighten the quarantine guidelines and begin distributing antizin to the infected cities. However, when news organizations from around the world began reporting the GRE's involvement with the outbreak, the GRE halted nearly all relief efforts. By early 2022, a vast majority of European nations declared martial law to contain the spread of the infection, which had already devastated nearly every major European city. In spring of that same year, the European city of Villador initiated construction of a massive border wall, which was initially built to isolate the world from their own THV outbreak. Constructed just outside the wall during this same period was a GRE facility called X13, run at least in part by Dr. Vincent Waltz, who, unknown to the GRE, began using X13 to study viral resistance in children. One of these resistant children was a young boy named Aiden Caldwell, who Waltz regularly experimented on in hopes that he could replicate the compound responsible for the resistance to save his own infected daughter Mia. Seeing as the two children were always in close proximity, Aiden and Mia developed a strong friendship, with Aiden growing to view her as his sister. All of this changed, however, when a sudden fire separated the two children, giving Aiden a chance to escape. Though free, Aiden vowed to do whatever it took to track down Waltz and find his long-lost sister. It was that very promise that drove him to become a nomadic courier known as a pilgrim over the following decade. During that time, Aiden met Spike, who himself had become a pilgrim in search of Kyle Crane. Though they only crossed paths occasionally, the two of them became close friends. By late January 2023, Dr. Katsumi, faced with the possibility of mankind's extinction, concluded that their only hope for humanity was for the GRE to focus their efforts on managing what little remained of the world and using any means necessary to develop a cure. Following suit, in March of 2023, the GRE, alongside France, Russia, the United Kingdom, Italy, Germany, Sweden, and Villador's army formed the Council of Mankind, a tripartite government organization focused solely on the continued survival of the human race. It was during their first meeting in Villador, the council declared the city to be the last bastion of civilization, prompting a mass exodus of refugees to travel to Villador. Following the council's declaration, the GRE set up dozens of facilities within the city in an effort to research the virus and develop a cure. To this end, citizens within Villador were equipped with biomarkers, devices that could read an individual's DNA to determine if they had been infected by THV, and if they were, how close they were to turning. In July of 2023, the Council of Mankind used their unprecedented authority to commandeer and centralize Villador's resources and infrastructure. It was during this same period Dr. Katsumi reported that the GRE's research had led to the development of a chemical compound called GenMod, which could degrade the very DNA of THV. By 2024, humanity had suffered an estimated population decline of 98%. Despite this, the population of Villador continued to grow as refugees from around the world flooded into the city, further draining its already scarce resource pool. As public unrest grew, militias began forming throughout Villador, increasing tensions further. On February 22, 2024, General Pratt ordered the army to confiscate all firearms from the citizens of Villador to snuff out the local militias. At noon on March 6th, a skirmish between the civilians and the army ended in the soldiers opening fire, the prime suspect being Colonel Chris Williams, whose hand in the event, known as the March Massacre, earned him the alias of the Butcher. In the end, 64 civilians were killed, inspiring countless riots and protests throughout the city. In a desperate attempt to maintain control, General Pratt declared martial law and ordered all confiscated weapons to be destroyed. However, this was simply the story told to the public, as in reality, Pratt ordered the weapons to be placed in storage indefinitely, believing that they were too valuable to be destroyed outright. By spring of 2024, the GRE concluded that Villador was the last major city left in the world, yet even they were not far from collapse. as by this time the risk of a THV outbreak was all but inevitable. In response, on June 9th, Pratt met with his fellow council members to announce his intention to cut power to the VNC tower, cutting off all communication within the city to halt widespread panic. Following this statement, Pratt ordered the GRE to rush production of GenMod despite the possible side effects. It's likely during this period that the GRE, pressed for results, developed HVM-5, also known as inhibitors, injectable devices that delayed infection and gave its users increased physical capabilities by combining both Antizin and GenMod. Like GenMod, inhibitors proved to be incredibly risky, preventing the GRE from utilizing them in any widespread or meaningful way. On June 20th, Villador's first major outbreak occurred. Soon after, the Council of Mankind was disbanded, leaving General Pratt to oversee the city's resources. After taking command, Pratt immediately implemented a strict immigration policy to maintain Villador's resources. When this act was met with public outrage, Pratt shut down the VNC's tower's transmitter once and for all. When this did little to quell the unrest, Pratt used the GRE as a scapegoat for the city's problems, reminding everyone that, if not for the GRE, they wouldn't be in this situation to begin with. At first, this method proved to be effective in drawing attention away from himself. However, it also unintentionally caused a citywide witch hunt for anyone associated with the GRE. Sometime after the GRE's influence began to fade, a soldier named Frank Marway, who had become infected sometime prior, stumbled upon what is presumed to be a stash of GRE inhibitors. Using the inhibitors, Frank, alongside two former soldiers named Killian and Hakon, established the Night Runners, heroic individuals who used inhibitors alongside devices such as paragliders and grappling hooks to effortlessly sweep across Villador's cityscape, all the while performing acts of selflessness. By October 2024, nearly every GRE scientist, including Dr. Katsumi, had been killed by rioters, leaving GenMod in a permanently unfinished state and halting all prospects of a possible cure. When Pratt's own military realized how short-sighted Pratt really was, they decided to take matters into their own hands by launching a coup d'etat that seemingly resulted in Pratt's death and placed Colonel Williams in command of the city. Believing Williams' promotion was undeserved, Army Major Jack Matt began sowing seeds of doubt within the army in a desperate attempt to garner power for himself. Sometime after Williams took command of Villador, he discovered that the outbreak had triggered the GRE's failsafe protocol, a final containment measure designed to prevent the virus from spreading by destroying the entire city with missiles hidden within X-13. Willing to do anything to stop this, Williams cut power to the city, knowing that he would never be able to turn it back on again or risk the city's destruction. While the city was safe, Williams was then left to deal with the outbreak, which grew worse day by day. By January 3rd, 2025, Williams decisively concluded that their last hope, while extremely risky, was to disperse GenMod throughout Villador via explosive ordnance. When Matt was informed of Williams' plan, he plainly stated his opposition to it. However, this did not deter Williams from going along with it. On Monday, January 6th, Williams carried out the chemical bombardment. Using this as an opportunity to permanently stain Williams' image, Matt outright ignored Williams' evacuation orders, leading to the immediate deaths of hundreds of thousands and eventually upwards of 2 million. When the bombardment was over, it was widely recognized to be the darkest day in Villador's history. As such, it was dubbed Black Monday. Shortly following Black Monday, a young girl named Lawan, whose parents were killed during the bombings, was taken and experimented on by Waltz. Weeks later, Lawan managed to escape back to Villador, where she eventually found refuge with Frank and the Night Runners. Over the next 6 months, Matt, using the failure of Black Monday to his advantage, sparked a revolution against Colonel Williams, eventually leading to the formation of the Peacekeepers. Likewise, a man by the name of Juan Rader created a group known as the Revolution Committee, which planned to take down Colonel Williams by enlisting the assistance of Matt's Peacekeepers and Frank's Night Runners. By mid-2025, the revolution had grown into a full-fledged civil war spanning throughout the entire city. By the end of the conflict, Williams, alongside those who remained loyal to his command, were forced to retreat to Villador's Dam. A deliberate choice, as with control over Villador's Dam, Williams could flood Villador with chemical-ridden water at any moment. Unwilling to provoke Williams for that exact reason, Matt shifted his focus to growing the Peacekeepers, while Williams restructured his loyal soldiers into a new army known as the Renegades. Sometime after the formation of the Renegades, Waltz approached Williams with a simple proposal. In exchange for access to test subjects for his experiments, Waltz promised to enhance the strength and resilience of Williams' men, giving the Renegades a crucial edge in battle to offset their smaller numbers. Though Williams harbored deep mistrust towards Waltz and his motives, he reluctantly agreed to the deal. Sometime over the next few years, a once famous celebrity named Astrid commandeered Villador's Royal Stage entertainment venue, transforming it into a violent combat arena known as Carnage Hall. During its early years, a man known as Ogar rose to become the reigning champion. However, at the height of his fame, Astrid ordered him to throw a fight with an up-and-coming champion named Skullface. Unwilling to do so, Ogar placed a bet on himself to win, then knocked Skullface out in the 3rd round. He then fled Carnage Hall with his 2 sons, Abel and Chiro. When Astrid inevitably caught them, she ordered Ogar to hand over one of his sons as payment for his betrayal. Believing that he had a better chance at survival, Ogar handed Abel over to Astrid, who then forced Abel to battle against Skullface. While it was believed by many that Abel was killed in the fight, in reality, he survived the ordeal, eventually rising to take up the mantle of Skullface himself, all the while believing that his father had given him up willingly. Around the early 2030s, Frank, assisted by Lawan and the Night Runners, established the Fisheye Canteen, a peaceful refuge for all survivors within Villador, and the headquarters of the Night Runners. It was during this period Lawan and Hakon got into a relationship and eventually moved in together. It's likely during this same nebulous period, survivors within Old Villador established the Bazaar, a peaceful settlement within the Church of Holy Trinity. A few years later, when the popularity of the Night Runners was at an all-time high, Frank orchestrated an ambitious raid on the VNC Tower to restore Villador's communication network. Just before the raid took place, Hakon, believing it to be a suicide mission, attempted to convince Frank to halt the raid. When Frank refused, Hakon convinced Killian to join him in abandoning the other Night Runners just before the raid took place. Stubborn to the end, Frank decided to go along with the raid anyways, resulting in the deaths of nearly every one of the Night Runners apart from Frank. Haunted by the loss of his team, Frank withdrew from the world, numbing his grief with bottle after bottle of alcohol. Shortly afterward, Hakon, hoping to redeem himself in the wake of the raid's failure, infiltrated Waltz's ranks to spy on Waltz. Suspicious of Hakon's intentions, Waltz threatened to kill Lawan if Hakon ever so much as questioned one of Waltz's orders. Stuck working for Waltz, Hakon decided that the only way to protect Lawan was to break up with her. By spring of 2036, Waltz had completely run out of renegade test subjects, forcing him to conduct research on himself. Additionally, it was around the same period that Waltz hired PK Commander Lucas to find a GRE access key, which he would need to get back into X-13, where he hoped he could salvage his old research to save Mia. Around early May of 2036, Commander Lucas stumbled upon a GRE access key. Refusing to hand it over to Waltz, Lucas attempted to flee from Villador, prompting Waltz to order Hakon to murder Lucas. Predicting this would happen, Lucas handed the key to a spy within Walt's ranks named Dylan, who then fled to the outskirts of Villedor. Not long after, Hakon murdered Lucas, in the process sustaining a wound from Lucas's prized brass knuckles called the Lazarus. Shortly after Hakon fled from the scene, a little girl named Maya stumbled upon Lucas's body, taking from it the famous brass knuckles. When the peacekeepers eventually learned of the murder, Lucas's second in command, Ader, questioned the survivors of the bazaar about the murder, none of whom knew the true culprit. In retaliation, Commander Ader locked down the tunnel to the central loop until the culprit was found. Not long after, while completing a delivery to Villedor, Spike made radio contact with Dylan. As Spike always did, he asked about a man named Waltz, who, for reasons Spike did not know, was important to his friend Aiden. Unlike every other time, however, this time, the response came back positive, prompting Spike to send word to Aiden to make his way to Villedor. Sometime after Spike made contact with Dylan, Aiden met with Spike just outside Villedor. When they regrouped at an abandoned estate, Spike instructed Aiden to use a nearby radio tower to contact his informant, who supposedly knew Walt's location. After the two parted ways, Aiden got into contact with Dylan, who sent him to the old tunnels of Villedor. Along the way, Aiden was bitten by a volatile just before he was rescued by Dylan himself. When Aiden awoke minutes later, Dylan told him to take the GRE access key and regroup with a woman named Lawan at the Fisheye Canteen. As Aiden hit an event, Waltz questioned Dylan on the location of the key before ending his life. Tailed by renegade soldiers, Aiden climbed into the bazaar, where he was saved by Hakon just moments before succumbing to the infection. When he awoke, Hakon led him to a GRE hospital where Aiden got his hands on a biomarker. When the two of them met sometime later, Hakon sent Aiden to the metro tunnels under the Peacekeeper base, hoping the two of them could use it to sneak into the central loop. In doing so, Aiden was caught and interrogated by Ader, who then sent Aiden to find the Lazarus and Lucas's killer in exchange for safe passage to the central loop. Doing as instructed, Aiden tracked down Maya, returned the Lazarus to Ader, and continued his search for Lucas's murder by building some trust with Sophie, the leader of the bazaar. By this point, Skullface, the uncontested champion of Carnage Hall, had nearly completely lost his mind due to years of relentless fighting fueled by chemical stimulants. Yet there was still a small part of him, or rather a small part of Abel, that knew that he needed to be taken down. As such, he sent out a vague warning to Aiden in which he instructed him to infiltrate Carnage Hall. Doing as instructed, Aiden traveled to the baptistry, where he and Abel's younger brother, Chiro, fought side by side in a mosh pit fight. In the end, however, Skullface interrupted the event, knocked out Chiro and Aiden, then flooded the building with infected. Following this, Aiden completed a series of tryouts, earning him a spot in the qualifying round. Afterward, Ogar, wishing to save his last remaining son, pushed Aiden to beat Chiro, eliminating him from the qualifying round. Before Aiden could do so, however, Chiro was taken as prisoner to Carnage Hall. Around this same period, Hakon planted a piece of Lucas's skin in Sophie's brother's apartment, therefore framing him for Lucas's murder. Shortly afterward, Aiden was faced with the decision of which faction to entrust with control of the old Villedor water tower. If Aiden trusted the survivors more, when he returned to Barney's apartment and found Lucas's flesh, he trusted that neither Barney nor Sophie would do such a thing, ultimately concluding that the killer was still on the loose. He then assisted them in destroying the Peacekeepers' windmill to loosen their grip on Old Villedor. In retaliation, the Peacekeepers raided the bazaar, which Aiden swiftly ended, placing the survivors as the dominant faction of Old Villedor. If Aiden chose to trust the Peacekeepers, Barney was instead arrested by the PKs. Meanwhile, Aiden, having found Lucas's alleged murderer, left with Hakon to the central loop. On the way, the survivors destroyed the Peacekeeper's windmill, cutting off power to the metro tunnels, separating Aiden and Hakon. Regardless of Aiden's decision, when Aiden met with Hakon shortly before the two of them planned to leave, Lawan shot Hakon in the chest. Upon inspecting the wound, Aiden spotted the other wound he sustained from his fight with Lucas, revealing Hakon as Lucas's killer. Faced with this betrayal, Aiden was given the choice to save Hakon or leave him to die. Regardless of his decision, in the end, Aiden fled for the central loop alone. On the way, Aiden was ambushed by Waltz, who stole the GRE key, then fled to a nearby car factory, where he used the key to reroute the factory's power to the city. In doing so, he restored power to X-13, as well as reactivated the failsafe protocol. It was at that point, Waltz finally recognized Aiden, opening an opportunity for Lawan to shoot him. After securing the key, Aiden followed Lawan to the central loop. When they reached safety, Lawan revealed her identity and her disdain for both Waltz and Hakon. Around the time Aiden made it to the central loop, he finally earned the right to enter Carnage Hall. As Aiden rose in popularity, he eventually discovered that Chiro was being kept in the dungeon, allowing him to save Chiro from Skullface. From this point, Aiden was given a number of opportunities, yet regardless of Aiden's decision, in the end, he managed to take down Skullface, freeing Abel from his torment. Left as the unchallenged contender, Aiden was then given the opportunity to embrace or reject his role as the champion of Carnage Hall. When Aiden eventually regrouped with Lawan at the fisheye, she introduced him to Frank. Waltz meanwhile launched an attack on the fisheye using renegade forces, implicating Williams as the aggressor and increasing tensions further. In the wake of the attack, Matt had Aiden deliver reinforcement orders to Lieutenant Rowe in exchange for the location of a GRE database. When Aiden arrived at the observatory where the database was located, however, he was unable to enter it as it was covered in chemicals. Shortly afterward, Matt promised to find intel about Waltz if Aiden helped him bring the VNC Tower's transmitter back online. To assist with the mission, Aiden was sent to procure UV lamps from Juan. A few hours later, the second raid on the VNC Tower commenced. Just as it did before, the mission instantly went sideways, resulting in the deaths of Rowe and his entire squad. Stranded in the tower, Aiden continued his ascent using a grappling hook left over from the Night Runner's raid. When he made it to the roof of an adjacent building, Frank encouraged Aiden to abandon his mission, believing like before it was absolutely hopeless. When Aiden refused to do so, Lawan decided to go after him. At the apex of the tower, Aiden was given the choice of who to entrust with control over the antenna. If given to Frank, he used it to broadcast music and other news throughout Villador. If given to Matt, however, he used it to spread Peacekeeper propaganda to boost enlistment numbers. Regardless of Aiden's choice, when Lawan made it to the top of the tower, she had Aiden fetch a new pair of shoes for her from her and Hakon's old apartment as payback for Aiden's recklessness. The following morning, Aiden boosted the VNC Tower's signal by activating a series of antennas, ultimately revealing Waltz was after a former GRE doctor named Veronica Ryan, who Aiden had briefly met during his time in Old Villador. It was around this point that Hakon, if he had not gone into complete isolation, invited Aiden to meet with him at the Church of St. John of God. Inside, Aiden was given the opportunity to end Hakon once and for all. If spared, Lawan attempted to cross him off her kill list. If Aiden chose to convince Lawan to forgive him, however, Hakon joined the both of them at the fisheye, where Frank decided to appoint Lawan as the first of a new generation of Night Runners. When Aiden eventually met with Veronica, she injected him with GenMod blockers, allowing the both of them to enter and restore power to the observatory. At the heart of the facility, Veronica searched the database for information about Mia, Waltz, and Aiden, ultimately discovering that Waltz's experiments originated from a facility called X-13, and that in just mere hours, missiles were going to strike the observatory and garrison. Seeing as garrison was Frank's territory, Aiden requested he evacuate the area. When Aiden and Veronica made it back to the surface, Aiden was confronted by Waltz. In the middle of their fight, Aiden began to succumb to THV, causing him to unconsciously murder Veronica. Just after dawn, Waltz stole the GRE key from Aiden only moments before the missiles struck the observatory and garrison. If Aiden put Frank in control of the VNC Tower's radio, Frank used it to successfully evacuate the civilians with little to no casualties. Williams then reached out to Frank to propose an alliance between his renegades, the Peacekeepers, and the survivors to stop Waltz from destroying more of the city. Hell-bent on destroying Williams, Matt attempted to assassinate Frank, which he then pinned on Williams himself. After saving Frank's life, Aiden infiltrated the Renegade stronghold. Inside, Aiden conversed with Williams, who explained his innocence in Frank's attempted assassination, as well as Waltz's reactivation of the failsafe protocol. If Aiden chose to trust him, Waltz arranged for Aiden's transport to X-13, hoping he would put an end to Waltz once and for all. If Aiden gave the radio to Matt, however, Frank put his own life on the line to save as many people as he could. Despite his efforts, hundreds died in the explosion, and Frank was eventually killed. Believing Williams was responsible, Lawan infiltrated the Renegade base, followed closely by Aiden. Inside, Williams explained the failsafe protocol. Refusing to trust him, Lawan attempted to shoot Williams. However, his wife jumped in the path of the bolt. Williams was then escorted out of the stronghold while Aiden opened the dam, lowering the water level to allow Matt's men to wipe out the renegades. When Aiden eventually tracked down Williams, Williams pointed Aiden toward X-13, hoping he would take down Waltz. As Aiden departed, Williams used what he believed to be the last remaining bullet in Villador to end his own life. When Aiden and Lawan made it to X-13, Aiden traveled to the heart of the facility, while Lawan, possibly assisted by Hakon depending on Aiden's choices, traveled to the facility's missile silo. When Aiden reached Waltz's location, Waltz revealed the truth about Mia, then the two of them battled for possession over the GRE key, which Waltz had given to Mia. In the end, Mia, believing her life did not outweigh the lives of those in Villador, held the key out for Aiden to take. In a desperate attempt to grab it for himself, Waltz accidentally slapped the key into a pool of chemicals. When Aiden informed Lawan of the key's destruction, Lawan decided to use explosives to manually detonate the missiles before they left the silo, saving Villador and giving Aiden the opportunity to escape with Mia. If Hakon followed Lawan to X-13, however, he managed to save Lawan just before the explosion. Over the next few hours, Aiden spent what little time he could with Mia before she passed away. Finally having accomplished what he came to Villador to do, Aiden buried Mia under an old oak tree, turned toward the horizon, and left the city. 2 weeks after Aiden left Villador, the city had reached a kind of equilibrium. If Aiden had lent his support to the survivors, the city came together to construct a soup kitchen for the poorest citizens. In addition to this, the Night Runners, led by Lawan, once again roamed the city's rooftops, ushering in a new era of hope for the people of Villador. If Aiden supported the Peacekeepers, however, potable water became a scarce resource within Villador due to the chemicals released from the lower water level. Naturally, water theft skyrocketed, forcing the Peacekeepers to resort to extreme measures to maintain order. It's likely around that same time Spike arrived at the fisheye, where he passed on a delivery before asking about Aiden's whereabouts, discovering that he had left the city. Sometime later, Spike discovered GRE files that revealed Kyle Crane had been captured by a doctor known as the Baron, who the files suggested ran several secret labs across Europe. It's likely that at that point, Spike sought out Aiden, who agreed to help search for Spike's long-lost friend. With time, the both of them eventually discovered that the Baron's last remaining operational lab resided deep within the forest of Castor Woods. Over the past 13 years, Crane was subjected to unrelenting psychological and physical torture at the hands of the Baron. Though it only took a handful of years to completely shatter his hope of freedom, it wasn't until much later that Crane had lost his very will to live. This very fact presented the Baron with an interesting problem. If Crane no longer feared death, then by definition, they could no longer trigger his survival instincts, as he did not wish to survive. Luckily for the Baron, it wasn't much longer until he would stumble upon the solution he was looking for. Or rather, his solution would stumble upon him. When Spike and Aiden arrived to free Crane, the two of them were nearly immediately captured by the Baron, who quickly identified Aiden as one of the two things he needed to complete his goal of creating a species that superseded both humanity and the infected. The other, however, still remained trapped within Crane's DNA, which remained inaccessible due to the loss of his survival instincts. Faced with this dilemma, the Baron planned to give Crane a new motive, one that he had no shortage of: revenge. With this, the Baron formulated a plan that involved freeing Crane, instilling him with a newfound desire to get revenge against him. To give Crane a means of accomplishing this, the Baron planned to release a class of infected called Chimera, each of which were engineered with the use of Crane's DNA to push him beyond his natural limits. After releasing the Chimera, the Baron would then free Crane, predicting that he would track down the Chimera, grow stronger, and ultimately go after him. The Baron would then catch him, extract his DNA, and use it in combination with Aiden's to perfect his experiments. Setting this plan into motion, the Baron forced Olivia to assist Crane in tracking down the Chimera, effectively threatening to kill her father if she didn't comply. When Olivia was on board, the Baron took what he needed from Aiden before turning him into a mindless beast for Crane to chase. It was at that point the Baron allowed the beast, and subsequently Crane, to escape, making the entire thing seem like it was a freak accident. Just as the Baron had predicted, Crane didn't hesitate to accept Olivia's assistance in escaping from the facility. Finally free, Crane met with Olivia at a nearby monastery, where she suggested that Crane hunt down the Chimera. In doing so, he could extract their unique GSB, a genetic enhancement enzyme that she stated he would need to grow strong enough to face the Baron's army. Willing to do practically anything to get his revenge, Crane faced a nearby Chimera. After the battle, Olivia extracted its GSB before Crane passed out from exhaustion. When Crane awoke days later, Olivia tasked him with searching the nearby town for survivors while she tracked down more Chimera. At the Castor Woods Town Hall, Crane faced another Chimera, injected himself with its GSB, and made his way to the roof, where Sheriff Florence, the leader of the Town Hall Rangers, had Crane restore the building's power. Back at the monastery, Olivia reinforced the importance of GSBs, then sent Crane after another Chimera. Following its defeat, the sheriff sent Crane to a nearby power plant to investigate the feasibility of getting it back up and running. At the plant, Crane met with Largo, a foreman who the Baron had stationed at the plant to keep survivors from bringing it back online. Despite Largo's insistence that restoring the plant was impossible, and following an unexpected ambush by the Baron's men, Crane managed to restore power to the plant. Shortly afterward, the sheriff was caught by the Baron while on patrol. Hoping to fracture Crane's alliance with her, the Baron threatened to massacre the survivors within Town Hall if she didn't help capture him. Meanwhile, Crane was sent to investigate one of the Baron's chemical plants. Inside, he interrogated a scientist who instructed him on using a certain red gas that the Baron specifically designed to lure Chimera. Taking it to a nearby junkyard, Crane confronted another Chimera. Around the same period, the Baron lured the beast inside a mine, where he was then captured. Following the Baron's orders, the sheriff informed Crane of the Baron's activity in the mine. Just as the Baron predicted, Crane didn't hesitate to travel inside, where he was then surrounded by the Baron's men. The Baron then stated that with his new subject, Crane was of no use to him. no doubt a lie to reinforce the illusion that Crane was truly free. Enraged, Crane used one of the soldiers to unlock the beast's cell, buying him just enough time to reach safety before the Baron caused a cave-in. By the time Crane made it back to the town hall, the sheriff was nowhere to be seen. Requiring new allies, Crane was sent to make contact with a group of infected test subjects of the Barons who had found refuge in the mountains. After Crane left, one of these so-called exiles, Sven, telepathically reached out to Crane to guide him to his location. When the two of them met, Sven asked Crane to rescue 2 scouts that had gone missing. When Crane eventually found them, he transported them back to the exiles' cave, where Lydia, the leader of the exiles, was adamant that Crane would only draw unwanted attention to their people. Despite Lydia's reluctance, Crane continued working with Sven to install signal amplifiers on the Baron's transmission towers, allowing the exiles to spy on the Baron's communications. Luckily, as soon as they tapped into the Baron's comms, they discovered that his men were planting explosives below the town hall at that very moment. With only minutes until the charges detonated, Crane rushed to the town hall and disarmed the bombs just before they detonated. Directly afterward, Olivia guided Crane to the location of yet another chimera. By this point, Lydia had finally come around to the idea of actively working to stop the Baron, believing that with Crane, the fight was no longer hopeless. As such, she instructed Crane to investigate a school that their scouts concluded held critical research. Inside the school, Crane helped an exile named Ray extract one of the Baron's scientists named Dr. Camilo Marin, as well as collected a handful of research files. After delivering the files to Lydia, Crane was sent to investigate the mysterious disappearance of Ray and Camilo, who were attacked by infected on their way to the cave. After finding Camilo, Crane was pointed to the location of another chimera. Meanwhile, Camilo and Lydia discovered through the Baron's research that the consciousness network shared by the infected was more than just a means of communication. By using plasma found in volatile larvae, Camilo believed that he could develop a compound that would allow Lydia to pacify and possibly even control the infected. Knowing that this was their single greatest weapon against the Baron, Lydia tasked Crane with infiltrating a volatile nest to collect the samples they needed. Inside the nest, Crane encountered another chimera and extracted a total of 3 samples for Camilo's experiment. Afterward, he took down yet another chimera, then met with Lydia and Camilo, who had him infiltrate a psychiatric hospital to procure a drug that Lydia needed to strengthen her connection to the infected network. Assisted by Lydia, who used her new abilities to pacify the infected, Crane infiltrated the hospital, collected the drug, and narrowly escaped with his own life. Shortly after Crane delivered the drug to Lydia, the Baron launched an assault on the town hall, using the red gas to flood the area with infected and chimera alike. When the battle was over, the sheriff finally came out of hiding to apologize to Crane, stating that she did what she had to protect her people. Willing to put his grudge aside, Crane, backed by Lydia and the sheriff, shifted their focus to catching the beast, who Lydia hoped she could subdue using her new abilities. Using the red gas, Crane lured the beast to a cave, where he wore him down just enough that Lydia could pacify him. Back at the exile's cave, Lydia managed to restore Aiden's mind. With Aiden at their side, Crane, Lydia, and the sheriff decided it was time they finally took down the Baron. Hours later, Aiden departed for the Baron's palace to rescue Spike alone, where he was then promptly captured. Just after dawn, Crane and his allies infiltrated the palace themselves. While his allies distracted the Baron's men at the courtyard, Crane traveled deeper into the complex where he found Aiden. As he freed him from his restraints, Olivia, following the Baron's orders, knocked Crane out and extracted a sample of his DNA. When he awoke sometime later, Crane found himself restrained at the head of a table, surrounded by his closest friends. It was then the Baron revealed the truth behind Crane's escape. A knife in hand, the Baron positioned himself behind Spike, stating that with his subjects back in his custody, he no longer needed to keep him alive. Absolutely helpless to fight back, Crane and Aiden were forced to watch as the Baron slit Spike's throat. After doing the same to Camilo, the Baron placed a gun in Olivia's hands, ordering her to kill Crane. Refusing to do so, she pointed the gun at the Baron and pulled the trigger, revealing that it was unloaded. As the Baron took his frustration out on Olivia, Lydia used her telepathy to stun him, giving Olivia an opportunity to stab him in the eye and free her friends. Outside the complex, Aiden and Crane confronted the Baron just moments before his extraction. Refusing to be defeated by his own creations, the Baron injected himself with his so-called perfected variant of the serum. Following a tough battle, Crane, fueled by over a decade of pain and torment, finally put an end to the man who had made his life hell. When the dust settled, the GRE contacted Kyle through his radio, expressing their satisfaction with his decision to end the Baron. Beyond fed up by their constant manipulation, Crane and Aiden set their sights on taking down the GRE.